Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we're here for part 13 of a probably 34-ish part series as we journey chapter by chapter through Fairy Tale by Stephen King. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go through a couple comments, then we're going to have a So What Happened portion of the video, which is a recap, and then we've got the Lit Crit and the Writer's Workshop, which are a little scant. I did not have very many talking points from this chapter. I don't know if maybe I am particularly dull right now, or if it was something to do with the writing in the chapter. So there's a couple times in a book where things can go so fast that there's really nothing to analyze, and there's some stuff that could be analyzed here that I'm just not sure what to make of it. Okay. Getting into that part, there's the horse. I could look into the symbolism of horses. I could think about what does it mean to speak through an animal, all of these sorts of things. I think that part of the sort of trouble with going through a book chapter by chapter like this, which I think is the best way to do it, I really do. It absolutely is murder for the algorithm, but I think that this is the most thorough way to do things and possibly the most fruitful. It just, without a little more context on a couple things in this chapter, it's hard to comment on them without just saying, without trying to draw conclusions as opposed to analyze something. I think there's a little bit of a difference between those two things. We have Charlie, the character, who has a couple of love interests so far through the first 13 chapters, but he's not really enamored with a woman until he meets one who can't talk. What does that say about Charlie? I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. Bowditch seemed to be quite the loner, but we're already left to draw conclusions because Bowditch, the man without a woman, seemed to love to run away to the land where women can't talk. So what's to make of that? Anyway, comments. We have a couple comments from Mike, and again, thank goodness we have comments because the discussion portion of this video is going to be a little scant. The first thing that I'd like to reply to that Mike said was that watching these videos, especially with the emphasis late in the video on writing, which, by the way, I think, not to get too off track, I think is to analyze writing as a writer is also to analyze writing as a reader. Writers have a duty to be the closest readers of all. So I think that this is not just a portion of the video to be reserved for writers, not that Mike implied that, but I just want to get that out there. But Mike says, watching these videos, I think he's got an emphasis on the later part of the videos, feels a lot like being part of a writer's group. Now, for anyone uninitiated on this channel, I ran several writers groups during my college days. And a lot of times, writers groups, they'll fizzle out, especially in the, I imagine, away from the college experience, because everyone has a lot more stuff going on outside of college days. But if you have not participated in a writer's group, even if you're not a serious writer, I cannot encourage it enough. Those writers groups, I ran them, I think, 4 times. The very first one was during the summer. We met once a week. There was 3 of us, and we all had to write a piece every week. A short story. We were writing short stories that summer. And you would write it, bring it back. You would write it, bring it in, we would all trade. So we'd all have to print off 3, one for us to keep ourselves, one for each of the other members. And the next week, We would critique those. So we'd read them during the week, write them up. The next week we would meet, critique, and turn in our next story. Probably that summer was the most, and I'm talking through a bachelor's degree in literature. I am talking through a master's degree in creative writing. That summer was the most formative and informative of my writerhood, because it was putting myself on a deadline, having to have, you really learn the fringes of your own brain in that fashion. And the second thing that Mike brought attention to, that I think I can elaborate on in words, is that I mentioned last week a little bit about how the story seemed to be zipping along through some things that maybe were not quite hashed out from Stephen King as the storyteller. And Mike said that he's noticed that both pro and amateur writers speed through things with which they are unfamiliar. So, two things here. As a reader, we can call BS. But as a writer, we have to call our own BS. We have to do it. We have to do that to ourselves. Because what it does is it is, so there are different careers where, like law enforcement, you have to present your thesis and then you have to counter it yourself. You have to shoot it down. So I think that this is the way this crime went down and this is what happened. Counterpoint, you have to go through your own stuff and disprove your own theory. And if you can't do that, it might not be a great sign that it's all that bulletproof, because the best theories are able to be disproven if under certain circumstances, right? I think that this person was murdered with, with this chemical. Someone was poisoned here. But if we don't find X chemical in his bloodstream, wasn't killed that way. You owe it to yourself to do that as a writer. To go back through as your own harshest critic, and not just from the woe is me perspective, but from the how would I write my own rejection slip for this story? And then what you get to do is go back and undo that. So for me, the writing process is everything is by hand with a first draft. After that first draft, I go and I have a 1.5 draft as I'm typing it up. Once I've got it typed up, I can print it out and make actual edits on the manuscript with a pen and a highlighter and all this stuff. But that actual second draft doesn't come until I have gone through with a critic's eye. So, what happened in this chapter 13 of Fairy Tale by Stephen King? Charlie and Radar get up early and pack for their trip, but Charlie was concerned about keeping the shed locked so that no one comes in and finds the portal to the other world. So he calls Andy Chen. Then he proceeds with Radar, who is hesitant at first, but ends up excited to go. So excited, in fact, that she makes the entire journey all the way down all those steps and out to Dora's home on her own. Doesn't need to be carried, doesn't need to be helped along. She runs the whole way. And then she tackles Dora in her own yard, and Dora is pleased to see Radar as well. And during the conversation that ensues, Charlie asks Dora about the shoes. And Dora replies, "You see, Googer." I thought that this was poor speech for use Google. That's what I thought was going on there. Not, in fact, what was going on there. She sends him on his way while Radar gets rest, and Charlie, unsure of things, steps out anyway and eventually A little ways down the road, Charlie meets a gorgeous young gray girl with giant blue eyes and blonde hair and no mouth. But not to worry, that's okay, because she can speak through a big white horse. Is it only the horse through which this young woman can speak? We don't know yet. Can she also speak through the gooses, the geeses, the guy? Geese. We don't know. But, oh yeah, Googer stands for Goose Girl. That is where Googer stands, where it comes from. So, the lit crit portion of this, I have but 2 talking points. The first one is from the later part of this chapter. We're going to save that one. I'm going to save that one. The first one, in the lit crit portion of this, Charlie and Radar go down the spiral, right? Down to the other world. Charlie has called his buddy Andy to come and lock the gate to the shed after them. Maybe I am misremembering the exact description of this shed. I don't think so, though. If you call Andy to come and put the lock on the door after you're gone, you then have to return to this shed, back up spiral staircase, and out into the shed, which is now locked from the outside. Am I missing something there? The second one of the strange quirks of fairy tales, because fairy tales involve the fantastical. Fairy tales are fantasy. Fairy tales are not... They have horror elements. They have probably science fiction. I guess the whole sowing gold from hay could be seen as science fiction. Maybe that's some technology that is allowing that hay to be turned into gold, right? So there are elements of other stories, other story types in fantasy, in fairy tales. I'm lost today, guys, by the way. But they also involve that fantastical in ways that makes you question things you probably weren't prepared to question. Often inappropriate, but sometimes not. So, for example, stories with giants. Giants aren't always married to giants. And you have to wonder, I think you're forced to wonder, about the geometry there. That's not too far out there, I don't think. The Rumpelstiltskin thing, making hay, making straw into gold. Is it just straw? The story doesn't tell us. I don't, at least not to the best of my recollection. But you wonder about other substances. Could other things be woven into gold, or just the straw? The one thing that comes up in other stories, mermaids. So the mermaids that are closer to us in time. Not the ones that are so far back. They're sort of like succubuses. That are little demons, right? That are luring you out to your death. Not those ones, but the ones that we get. Ariel. The perfect woman. Until it's time to be betrothed. Certain questions there. So we have here a question that perhaps we're not ready to ask. And we don't have to gender it. It doesn't have to be the perfect woman. It could be the perfect spouse. Women on the other side of this, looking at men or anyone who's interested in anyone, your perfect spouse, how important would it be for them to be able to talk? What is it that you value in a significant other? What is it that you value from someone who you're ready to love and spend the rest of your life with? We have Charlie here admitting he's smitten with this girl who has no mouth. Really? You can't really talk to her. Now, I've had friends and I've dated women who were, English was not their first language. That's not this. That is not this. How important is, if you were ranking what it was that was important, for me, I think communication would be pretty far up there. I've been with all sorts of women. Communication is what makes someone worth spending time with, right? Worth spending actual time with. And not having to have their damn horse around. And maybe she can talk to the geese. I don't know. We haven't come across that part of the story yet. But these are, anytime you have fantasy elements, I think that they welcome questions in a much different fashion than other forms of storytelling, because what you're doing with fantasy, oftentimes, giants, okay? That's a person, but really big. Unicorns, well, that's a horse, but magical and with a horn. You're taking something you know, taking the familiar and unfamiliarizing it. So, when you take the familiar and you unfamiliarize it, it is that disfamiliarity that prompts other questions from the reader, from the audience. Far be it from me to insinuate that this is... Okay, so let's get into it. We talked a little bit about this story maybe being a metaphor for Stephen King as Bowditch passing on the tradition of writing to his son, Charlie Reed. Not quite the son, but the heir apparent. Passing on writing to the next generation. Passing on writing as in the other world. We have that other world represented by this place. Now, this place can keep you young forever. Your words, this place, live on forever. It's a fantasy. The fantasy place, the writing, is also the place where women can't talk. Okay, I'm just putting it out there. I don't know. They had we have the two gray men that show up momentarily, and I don't remember if they had mouths off the top of my head, but the only people that Charlie is interacting with so far are women. We have the Goose Girl, we have Dora, we even have Radar, his guide to this other world. Weird. The only note that I have for the writer's workshop portion of this video comes to us on page 221. Luckily, we get this on a day with a couple short other points because it's a big one. It's a big one for the immediacy of your writing. It's a big one for how tangible your story feels. It's a big one for how deep a reader will get lost in your experience. So, Haunted. Haunted? By Chuck Palahniuk? You know, at one point in time, I said that this was my favorite book. You would think I would be able to remember. It's not a great book, but it's very ambitious. I don't care. I think it's haunted. Haunted, haunting, something like that. I believe it's haunted. It's about a group of writers that go into a retreat and share stories and things like that. Not a great book, but it's very ambitious in the scope that it tries to encompass. One of the reasons that this book has lived for so long, I mean, he's got to be 15 years old by now, at least, is that there's a short story in it called Guts. And that short story makes people pass out. I know someone who passed out. I know someone who passed out reading that short story. It's not an urban legend. The short story makes people pass out. The reason, I think, in my opinion, that it makes people pass out is not that it's so horrifying. It's about a guy getting stuck to the bottom of a pool by his rectum. He hovers over the suction, the drain at the bottom of the pool to get his jollies, right? What the story does not do is the story does not filter. And I'm saying this off the top of my head. It's very possible that it does filter. It's just well written. But when a writer filters, it puts an extra step between the reader and the story. And I'm going to explain this. With an example from page 221. The penultimate paragraph, the last full paragraph, there was nothing I could do about it anyway. All I could do was follow the plan. I descended the steps until I only stuck out from head to chest, with the boards once more in the V shape and close to either side of me. I began placing tied bundles of magazines on them, walling myself in. All the time I was doing it, I listened for a thud and a final cry of pain, or, if the fall didn't kill her, many cries as she lay on the packed dirt, dying by inches because of my bright ideas. So what is filtering? The part of this that made me realize there was filtering going on was this sentence here. All the time I was doing it, I listened for a thud. Now, that's perfectly acceptable writing. You understand everything that's going on. And Stephen King, to his credit, and this might be the best thing that Stephen King does, you are always able to see precisely what is happening. Now, that sounds like short-selling an author, but if you have ever read bad prose, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There are some writers who do not care for you, and they don't care if you understand what's going on. And there are some writers who don't know. They don't care for you. So filtering, when Charlie tells us here, he was listening for, that's filtering. It is saying, so you are my audience right now. If I tell you I was hearing something, you have to put in your own brain what it is like to hear that thing. You have to interpret then through me into the real world here. Verses. You hear that? That steady hum? That steady, thudding hum? Hum, 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 hum. Something getting constantly closer. Hum, hum, hum. Getting more and more speed as it comes closer, gaining more and more volume. Hum, hum, hum. That is not filtered. Filtering is a character telling you what they heard, a character telling you what they felt, a character telling you what almost happened. This almost happened. Show us the thing happening. Where are we at here? I descended the steps until I only stuck out from head to chest. To a smaller degree, that as well is filtering. I descended and felt I descended the steps, and you don't have to say until I only stuck out from head to chest. You tell us what it's like to be there. You tell us that far down, all of the other things were at arm level, were at shoulder level. I could grip the boards and pull them over. Everything was right in front of me, so I gripped it and pulled it over. Then we, as the reader, are on that level. Versus here, we are forced to see Charlie at that level. The story, Guts, which makes people pass out, I think it starts with the line, something like, you could almost hold your breath as long. Something like that. And Chuck Palahniuk has such tangible writing, such burnt tongue writing. If you don't know the term burnt tongue, it's worth looking up. There is a Tom Spanbauer clip on YouTube from more than a decade ago now about burnt tongue writing and about dangerous writing. It's worth looking up. Just put in Tom Spanbauer dangerous writing. It should come up. Now I've lost myself. Oh, right. Guts starts basically with instructing you to hold your breath. The rest of the writing is so tangible, is so unfiltered, that once you've held your breath, you forget you're holding it. And you're reading all of the other writing going along. And the act of reading, when you are reading at a fevered pace, instills a bit of vertigo into the reader. And that is a physical change on me from the text. If you were real quick, you get a little bit of vertigo. So people hold their breath. They're reading. They forget they're holding their breath. They induce vertigo. They pass out. That's how that short story does it. Because Palahniuk is so good about not filtering. So one of the things that Palahniuk gets a whole lot of schlock for is using second person. But second person is the very definition of not filtering. You put your hand around the barrel of the gun and you feel that it is still warm, right? There's no filtering there. That is you. That is you doing it. It's almost impossible to filter in second person. But because Palahniuk is not afraid to drop into the second person from time to time, those stories become so much more tangible to the reader, and he's able to make you pass out from his writing. That is all I have for this, the 13th chapter of Fairy Tale by Stephen King. I will be back on Monday with another chapter on Fairy Tale, but I have made the pledge to do a video on a horror story every day from the 22nd, I think it was, through the 31st, through Halloween. So I will be back tomorrow with something, but I don't know what yet. And Friday, I will be back with the opening paragraph from The Mask of the Red Death. An opening paragraph video from The Mask of the Red Death. So there will be a video every day until Halloween if you are into that sort of thing. And I hope to have you back for all of them.